Welcome to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We are so excited to have you joining us on this journey where we explore different ways to empower your soul, whether it's healing in your kitchen or all the way up in the corporate world. Come with us as we look into different ways to heal your mind, body, and soul. Hi everyone, it's Catherine from Willow Healing here, and I'm very excited to introduce Monique Peters today from Learnerobics. So she's a learning coach and the founder of Learnerobics, and her journey is a bit of a different one. So if anyone's a parent out there, they'll probably resonate with this because often we go on a search for things to help our children and then end up finding things that we want to work on as well. So Monique started her journey when she found that her son's learning challenges were just not being met. So she was asking school for help. She was seeing all these tolls of the social consequences and as well on his mental health. And she wasn't getting as much help as she wanted. So she started to research and look into the brain and how the brain could work. And so since then, she's been learning more about neuroscience, the growth mindset, and brain health, and has served more than 150 clients to improve their ability and attitude to learning and reading. So welcome, Monique.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we were just talking before we started recording about auditory processing disorder. So did you want to go into a little bit about what that actually is and how it can really impact children and adults in all aspects of life, really?
Yeah, it certainly can. So it affects your ability in all four areas of speech. So that's listening and speaking, reading and writing. And where I see it is their ability to understand and communicate, which I see as a basis for being able to learn, so academic learning, social learning and mental health going along with that. So typically what I see is children who are learning to read, and like my son was in year 3, was reading, but as it became more complicated, he wasn't able to manipulate all those sounds and hold on to those sounds, and really he stayed in that level of working very hard to read, so he never got to the enjoyment stage. And this is what auditory processing disorder does. It kind of keeps kids there, and then they start to avoid it. So they'll avoid reading, so their neural pathways don't get the exercise that they need to build those strong neural pathways, because we know reading is not natural, and they just don't build that. They don't get the repetition because they're not doing the work. So auditory processing disorder is a very complex thing. It can be either genetic, or it can be as a result of not hearing enough speech as they were growing up, as people were growing up. So things like not being spoken to enough, not hearing enough stories. I love the baby talking. A lot of people don't like the baby talking, but that is really good for programming a child's brain to hear the vowel sounds. And
well, it's also engaging that prosody. I think that's what a lot of people don't like, the baby talk, but at the same time, if you're not going to sing to your child, you still need to engage them in that melodic intonation.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. And even so, we're knowing now that a lot of children are starting school without ever having learnt a nursery rhyme. Now, nursery rhymes are, I get they're a bit outdated and so on, but make up poems. Yeah. And make up things, use that lovely rhyming to help their brain to really understand the difference between those and hear the difference between those little phonemes, because the children I see often can't hear the difference between et and it. Mm-hmm. So if you can understand, if they're sitting in a classroom and they're trying to listen to things, they don't know if they're hearing the word big or beg or pig or peg. And it becomes very difficult to understand, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know that they're not hearing things as well as everybody else is. And they'll also they'll pass hearing tests, because that's about volume. It's not about how a brain processes all those sounds.
Yeah, and we were talking about just before too, so as a speech therapist, when we assess a child, it's in a quiet environment, it's one-on-one, and they look fine on paper. And these kids who are coming in with auditory processing disorder, it's only when you start to nitpick things and you think, wow, you're really not remembering a chunk of information. Like if we read a paragraph to them, they're not retaining that, or they're not able to remember a sentence, or the directions get longer and all of a sudden it gets harder. But what we often don't take into account is all the noise that they have to put up with in the classroom. So, not only are they trying to filter out and figure out what the teacher's saying, but then they're also trying to, take into account, oh, there's all this background noise, all these, little Jimmy's talking behind me as well, and I just can't filter that out and listen, and then I'm already working really hard to be able to remember what's being said in the first place.
And we wonder why they start to avoid school if it's not coming together for them. So I often give the example of my child or my son who would, the teacher might say something like, okay, children, sit down, open your book at page 2 or 3, answer the questions 1 to 4. And he wouldn't be able to remember that. So he'd ask the child next to him, who would get frustrated inevitably because he was always asking, what did the teacher say? And so they would tell him to get lost, maybe not as politely as that.
Yeah, and often year 3s when we would often get an influx of referrals too, because that's when the learning to read has shifted to reading to learn. So there's this emphasis that they should just be able to read to start learning information. And so whilst they're being, be able to copy the kids next to them, especially the younger kids in kindy, I see a lot of kids, they're really clever. So we want to emphasize too, this has nothing to do with intelligence.
Yes.
This is to do with just how their brain processes information. And and they'll just be so cluey. They can just hang back just like a couple of seconds and watch what their peers are doing. And so they can mask all these difficulties. And then as the, academic pressures increase, that's when we get to see these kids coming through.
That's right. And then they're burnt out. And so what I've also learned through my growth mindset research is that feeling of stress is making them feel like they're being hunted in a classroom. Do you know what I mean? They're sort of, it feels like they're being preyed upon, because even just a teacher saying, oh, would you like to read? It's your turn to read out loud. It's like panic stages for them.
Anxiety, massive things. Yeah.
That's right. And I mean, my son came up with his tactics. His best one was to spend as much time in the bathroom as possible at school. But there is, many people adapt in many different ways, and this is where a lot of our comedians can come from. But there's also very shy and quiet people. They can be bullied, they can be targeted, but they can also be bullies. Being excluded socially. I saw my son go through that, and that was heartbreaking.
Yeah, because it's like, unfortunately, kids can be cruel sometimes, and it's that stigma of, and also his energy would have been, I'm not good enough. And then people feel on that energy too, right? Especially kids. Kids are little emotional radars. If anyone's worked with kids, they understand what I'm talking about. You do not come in on a bad day and bring that in with you, because you'll be roasted alive. But it's that energy too, and then they pull in that energy, and then socially it becomes really sad. Not sad, but it's hard.
It's hard. It becomes very hard, and it depending on them. So if the family has a lot of support, so I've worked with families where the children are having these problems, but now that the parents know kind of what's going on, they're getting things in place and things that are happening. And sometimes too, like I was doing everything I possibly could. I was going through speech therapy, I was going through, what was it again, behavioural optometry, I was going... we tried changing his diet, taking him off gluten and dairy, and there were so many different things that we tried, but some things worked. I remember with the behavioural optometry, because he had a bit of a eye tracking problem, so that was really helpful for that. But I couldn't understand why are the other things not working if we're doing all of this. So it's a very complex thing, and there's also nature and nurture going on, But what I've been able to bring it down to is if the kids are having spelling problems, and if they continue to have spelling problems. So if you think that they've got a word now and they get it, and they show it a day or two later that they're still not spelling that word correctly, then there's something there with the ability to hear the difference between the phonemes and do that decoding side of things.
Yeah, and that's where that auditory processing is breaking down. So I guess I'll take one step back so people understand a bit more what that is. So we all learn differently.
Yeah.
And you'll have people that will argue like, oh, you can't just put people in a box of how they learn or whatever. But it depends on what we're doing, right? So if you're learning to drive, you're not going to learn to drive from watching somebody or reading a book, right? So that you have to do. So that's where you engage with kinesthetic pathways. So you're doing pathways. And then visually, some things you just need to see. Like you can't watch a movie without your eyes being open. You can listen to it, but it's not going to have the same impact, right? And then we've got our auditory pathway, which is listening. And unfortunately, the classrooms are set up mainly to be in an auditory format with some visuals. But if you're a kinesthetic learner, like if you prefer to do things, that doesn't always fit for you as well. So when we're talking about auditory processing, it's a breakdown in how children and adults remember things that they hear.
That's that working memory. So we know working memory is a really big part of auditory processing disorder. But the good news is that working memory, as all other memory, types of memory, because there's so many, well, not so many, but there's quite a few different types of memory, but we can exercise those skills in the brain. We can give them specific targeted practice at certain things with a lot of repetition, and we can build those auditory processing muscles up,
so
which is the good news.
Instead of going to the gym, they go to Learnerobics.
That's it. That's exactly right.
I say the exact same thing to clients. Like, don't freak out about it. It's something that can definitely be strengthened, and it's not necessarily a boring way to do it either, especially with kids.
We make it as fun as we possibly can, but so in the program that I have, it's an online program, so they just do it at home. We give them some sequencing exercises, so they'll have to listen to beeps, and all these beeps are the pitches and tones of speech, and they have to be able to put them in the right order because that sequencing is so important. And they'll start off with 2 beeps that are quite far apart in both pitch and timing, but as they work through, because it is adapting to them, and as they pass certain stages, then they'll go, the beeps get closer and closer together. And then in the next module, they'll start working with 5 beeps. And it's amazing to see the progress. So often they start, and I can see that doing many days, and there's not that much progress being made on the screen. But I know what's going on in their brain, and I know with every try, their brain is building those connections. So they just have to keep trying. And what I recognised fairly early on in the piece was that they need support at this point, because it's discouraging, and they see that they're doing all this work, but they're not. So I send certificates for their effort rather than the progress they've made. So, I always try to let mum know that tell the student that the coach sees what you're doing. I see how hard you're working, and I know you're doing a great job. Well done, and we even put in rewards for the effort they've made. So we might have something like tokens, or it may be a coin, however the family wants to use that system, and they put a coin in for each day they do the work, and then they can spend that at the end of the week, because it's also about delaying gratification and that need to be comfortable all the time. So I'm trying to build that skill up as well. So I do that with the coaching while they're going through the program.
It's like, as an adult, you have to wait for your pay. You
That's
still
right.
go to work because at the end of the week, if you're lucky enough to be paid weekly, you'll get paid.
That's right.
So,
well, it's about that. Do you remember the marshmallow test?
No.
Oh,
Yes, I do.
It's so beautiful. I love this, and I often send a video to my clients when I'm onboarding them. But it's back in the 60s. They did they found out that children who are able to delay their gratification, that is the biggest indicator of how successful they're going to be in life. Now, successful is a funny word for me because it means lots of different things to everybody. But being able to say no to yourself is a big factor in building other skills that will take you to where you want to go.
Yeah.
So you see these children, and they're put in a room with a marshmallow, and they're told, you can have the marshmallow now, or you can have another one in 10 minutes when I come back. And then they film these kids. This is all with the parents' permission, of course. And you see them, and some of them are looking at it, and some of them are licking it, and over time that they're sitting on their hands, and they're trying so hard, so valiantly not to eat the marshmallow because they really want to be able to do it. And some of them eat it. I know that as a 4-year-old child, I would have been one of the ones that ate it after about 30 seconds. And when people talk about the marshmallow test, they kind of stop there, and that saddens me because I know that being able to delay gratification is also a skill you can build.
Yeah.
You might not be born with it, but it means you can still build the skill. So you can build that over time, and you can develop that skill. So, which is what I've learned to do over my life.
Well, as well too, because it's teaching us resilience. Because if we have our big vision or our big plan, you know, it's learning to be adaptable to that, and that, okay, I've got this plan, I know I want this vision. And I read this thing the other day, and it said, be strict on the vision, but be flexible on the plan. So, you
Sounds
know,
lovely.
Yeah, so you're learning how to still adapt and roll with whatever might come through.
That's right.
But you still have that vision intact, so that you know that this is what I'm working towards. And that delayed gratification, I feel, is that, because I know personally, working on certain things, it's like, oh, I'm still doing this, even with healing.
Yes.
You know, I thought I already worked on this on myself, but no, there's another layer, you know, so it links back to that as well. Like, even in an adulthood, you just have to go, okay,
that's
I'm
right.
still on this path, but
Yes.
I just have to jump another hurdle, and that's okay.
That's right, and that's, to me, that's the joy of life.
Yeah.
You know, you might think you have something down pat, and then something surprises you. And then you need those skills of being able to delay your gratification. And so I'm working on my weight at the moment, and so that's a huge exercise in being able to delay gratification. So,
and dumping all the protective shields you put around yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess too, the other thing, when you're talking about rewarding effort, that's a big thing that they've started doing studies on, that adults are more successful in life are the ones that were praised for making the effort rather than just praised for getting the good grades.
That's that beautiful growth mindset research, and I love it so much. And you can just imagine how it feels to a child. So imagine
I'm pointing to myself.
That's right, because imagine you're sitting there and you're trying so hard. So I could see how hard my son was trying at school. He wanted to do things a bit differently than everyone else. I remember he wanted to do a lot of his assignments in primary school as TV commercials, because he's just got a marketing brain. He was just born with that. And, of course, the answer was no, you can't do that. But he, seeing him make all that effort, and then seeing all the kids, often the ones that were bullying him, get awards, was really hard for him.
Yeah.
It's a terrible thing for a kid to see. So I always, when I'm talking with mum and doing the coaching with mum, I'm always asking them to bring that feeling across, that you're acknowledging their efforts, always acknowledging their efforts. When I send an award, I ask them to, if they can, before they have a meal together, to formally acknowledge that in the family. Like, we want to acknowledge the effort, not the fact that you're receiving a certificate, but the work that you've done.
Yeah.
And that's what encourages that work to be done, to keep going.
And to keep trying and to persevere.
That's right.
And, you know, and then go for your big vision.
That's
you know,
it.
but be adaptable in the plan. Exactly. So I guess, what are some flags if people are concerned about themselves even, or even their children? What would some flags be?
For me, the biggest one is spelling.
Yeah.
That's where I really see it. But it's if a child is not thriving at school,
Academically.
or
even socially.
Well, executive function-wise. So even if they're not able to keep up with the organising of their things, another big sign was mixing up syllables. My son often used to say hospital instead of hospital. Or it was actually quite cute. We used to love it when he spoke like this. He used to say hippopotamus instead of hippopotamus, or the service station.
Oh, wow.
And these were indicators that I didn't realise then, because everyone was telling me at the time, oh, he'll grow out of that, don't worry about it. So I didn't.
Yeah, and then your kids normally do about 4 or 5.
Yes,
they'll start to shift out of that phase.
That's right. He also had a stutter when he was 3 that was very quickly fixed. With some speech therapy, and that was an indicator as well. And I also thought back when when his dad was away and Dad would call on the phone, he wouldn't understand as well as when Dad was in the room, because he used to say something like, "Can you roar?" So my son would say, "Roar," but when Dad was on the phone, he would still say, can you roar like a lion? And my son would look very blankly. And so, but that was only in hindsight.
Yeah.
We didn't know that. I just thought that was fine at the time, no problem. Yeah.
And then if you're an adult, I guess those similar things would be if you always struggled with reading.
Yeah, so adults are interested. So a lot of the parents start to recognise some things as I start to work with them, and that's very understandable. But if you hear the adults that say, oh, school just wasn't for me, because I remember, so I'm in my 50s now, so I had most of my schooling in the 70s, or primary school in the 70s. And if I look back in the classroom, I can now see 4 or 5 kids that would have needed help.
Yeah.
And their behaviour reflected that. So it's often coming out in behaviour. I mean, I believe that behaviour is communication. So it may not be reflecting or showing up as a reading issue or a learning issue, but it may be coming out in their behaviour, and they're trying to communicate to you in the only way they know how.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then often, especially then there can be that negative reinforcement where they learn, oh, if I act up in the class and I get sent to the principal's office, then I don't have to be in the classroom.
Yes.
And then I don't have to learn.
That's right.
Which I'm finding really difficult to begin with. So I remember years ago I worked with this really great assistant principal. He's head of the support unit at the school I was working at. And he sat me down one day, he goes, I never send kids home. And I said, why is that? He goes, because then they learn by doing that behaviour, they get to go home, which is where they want to be, because they want to be with their devices, or they want to be watching TV or be around mum and dad. So they never get to go home. And he was the most gentle person until he got mad. Even I was scared when he would yell. And that everyone just knew if they had to go to his classroom. The kids in his class never acted up, but if the other kids ended up in his classroom, they knew they would just have to sit there and do something. Otherwise, they would not get to go and be rewarded for that.
Yeah.
And I felt that was such a powerful example of just being mindful of how those behaviours are trying to get out another outcome often.
So that's another thing that I've developed along the way, is this interest in this evolutionary side of what's going on here. So those 3 brains that we talk about, the reptile or the survival brain, and the mammal emotional brain, and the human prefrontal cortex brain, which is not there until they're about 25, 28. So, which is why they behave the way they do. They don't understand the consequences and they can't analyse their behaviour. Those survival instincts can be very, very strong, and they'd be very defensive if you feel like you're under attack. Yeah. You can imagine how that feels. But then there's also that mammal layer on top, or where all our emotions are, and where our feelings of wanting to fit in are. Yeah. So I had an exploration not so long ago of my people-pleasing habits, which I developed as a child, and I'm working on now as a
nice girl syndrome.
That's it.
Yeah.
Less conflict, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But my coach challenged me with something, and this was a coach who I've been working with for a while and has given me a lot. So I didn't want to let him down. So my people-pleasing side was on full go. But it was a lot of work, and I was exhausting myself, but it was challenging me. And in the end, when I look back, I'm actually glad for that people-pleasing side of me, because it got me through that challenge, which was really, really difficult. So we can kind of learn to move things around. It also helped me recognise how much of a people pleaser that I was at the time, working on, moving through.
Yeah, I'm the fixer. I'm going to fix everything and everybody. And then I went into a profession where I have worked with beautiful children who have very tricky communication skills.
That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
You probably have your reasons for having been there and being a fixer.
But then when you're trying to fix people and relationships, and you're getting into relationships with people to try and fix it.
Exactly. Yes. That's exactly right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I guess, doing anything, especially with children are very good at reflecting things in yourself that you go, oh, I still need to work on that.
Very much so.
Yeah. As a parent, you might know what I'm talking about. Any parents listening, like when your children just manage to find that right button to push, and you think, why am I getting so angry? And then you think, oh, this is still a thing in me that I need to work on and I need to heal and I need to
And
shift.
how clever are they to find it?
I know. Well, they are mini versions of us.
Yes.
Definitely. So I guess if people feel that they want to improve their memory or improve their reading and literacy skills, or even for their children, what would the process be for contact?
Get in touch with me and have a chat. So not everybody is ready to come onto the program because it is that little bit challenging. There are things that we can do beforehand to improve things like attention span. So we talk about how you need sort of at least 30 minutes 5 days a week, which is quite a big commitment, especially if you've got things, soccer practice, choir practice, all those other things going on as well. Life, that's it. That's exactly right. So we work out whether it's a good time for you or not. So if it is, then we go ahead. It will take about 3 to 6 months. You can have breaks, but you can have 3-month programs, and there's 1 month programs, so you can take 1 month at a time if you want to. But it is recommended for at least 3 to 6 months for you to see some real benefits from it. We work specifically on the attention spans, memory, executive skills, just by exercising them all, and the language processing. So they'll do the sorts of exercises where they're holding on to phoneme sounds and they're playing a game like memory. Where they have to match the sound while they're hearing all the other sounds, and so there's a lot of discrimination as well as memory going on in that particular.
So phonemes are, just for anyone who's not sure what phoneme means, is actually when we sound out a word like cat, we go k, at, and those individual sounds are called phonemes. So and if anyone's tried to teach spelling, they would understand how complex it can really get, because like a sound like A has at least 8 different ways you can spell it.
That's right.
You know, and for children, that's really overwhelming. And I know because I work with literacy with children. And they're like, there's more. And I'm like, I know. Like, let's learn these, you know. So that can be a big thing too.
That's right.
And to have that understanding. And I guess a lot of us, we don't actually remember that whole part, learning to read.
No, and that's the process of what's going on in the brain, because our brain has been through so many times. Those little myelin pathways have thickened up, and those electrical signals are travelling so fast that we don't even think about it. And this was something that really came out in the, you know, about the science of reading research.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, it's so exciting, because they've worked out for sure from all that beautiful fMRI imaging that we can do now, that our brain does need to hear the phonemes, and that whole word reading doesn't work.
Yes. So,
some people can do it for a while because they're extremely clever.
Yeah.
But we need to know the sounds behind those letters.
Yeah. So anyone who's listening, there's been this massive debate in how to teach children how to read. And there was a model called Bottom Up, which was that they, Bottom Up is where they do the sounds first. I always get confused. So you do the sounds first, and then you build up to teach them how a word is. And then there's another method called Top Down, which is you just teach them the word and then they'll figure out the rest afterwards. So different models work on different programs, work on these different things. And then there's also another thing called sight words. So these are words that we just get shown and we'll just know what they are, like the, or, you know, she, or these high frequency words we see all the time around us. So there was this big debate for years and years and years and years and years.
Decades.
Decades. And it was immense. So these schools would just adapt a new program and they would argue that that's the better way and that sort of thing. And if a child didn't respond, and don't get us wrong, because some kids do work that way, and because their brain just can take it and they can wire it. But for those kids who are struggling with reading, if they don't understand those basic phonemes and those sounds, they really, really struggle with the rest of the program. So there's just been this big shift, which has been exciting, but there is like this gap in the middle. So this is why even research showing that rhyming can be a good way, and it's not essentially hasn't been proven to be a indicator of a good reader long term, but it still helps kids know, like, hey, if you say to them, okay, let's write tap, it sounds like cap. You know how to spell cap. what are the sounds in that? And that is where that rhyming comes in, why it becomes really important. And even syllables, which we were talking about, how your son missed up the syllables. When you're trying to spell big words, what do we always do? We sit there and we break it down and we sound it out into chunks. You know, like even the word polysyllabic, which means many syllables, you have to break it down. So you would go polysyllabic. And that's exactly how we help kids learn how to tackle those bigger words as well.
Yeah.
So there's lots of big shifts that are happening. And I guess letting you know too, like we were emphasizing at the start, just because you or your child has a reading problem does not reflect your intelligence.
No.
It is a different pathway. It is something that it has to be learned, and it's really difficult. And if you ever speak to anyone that's multilingual, they will tell you how difficult English is.
Well, the other thing that's behind that is that for millions of years, millions of years, we spoke.
Yes.
And we listened.
Yes.
So reading and writing is very, very new.
Yes.
As far as our brain is concerned.
Yep.
So,
even like First Nations, they've always traditionally passed their stories on using song lines and sharing their stories through song and dance and interpretation. And how accurate these songs are, these stories and songs are amazing, and it's about remapping the pathways in the brain.
Right. Yes.
So it's like another way of using like mnemonics or things like that. But it's really cool, the studies coming out with how that impacts them. But they never wrote things down. It was all just passed generation to generation orally.
Their memories were spectacular.
Yeah.
Absolutely spectacular. I know of African tribes that were able to do it like a Linnaeus style classification of everything around them in their heads.
Yeah.
You know, with their memory.
Yeah.
So how amazing is that? We have a lot to learn from them.
Exactly. And even they could go like walk anywhere in the country and they would know where things were because they just go back to their song lines and the information that was presented to them orally through generations.
That's right. And it's always good to know. I love telling this to parents and kids who are struggling, that our brains, nobody's brain was meant to read. The fact that most of them do, and we have amazing things around us that we've been able to build because we can read and write now. But our brain was never meant to, you know. And so when you think of that lovely natural state.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And even, you know, when we look at things, we're often pulled to the picture, and before we go to look at the words, well, that's me anyway.
I love the pictures.
Like I do. I like a diagram. I like something to help me with processing that. You know, and there's so much things coming out now. Even you know, even if it's not an auditory processing disorder, it could be a visual processing disorder. You know, or it could just be maybe there's a disconnection between your brain and how it writes. You know, and there's so many things that can break down, and it doesn't mean that you're illiterate. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. Yeah. It just means we need to help you find another way and empower you to be able to do that if you choose to. You know, we're lucky because we're kind of in this technology age where you can get away a little bit more with not being able to read and write. Thank you to voice to text, and you know, it reads things out and things like that. But at the same time, I tell my clients, you still need to be able to fill in a form with your name and put some basic details on there. Yeah.
And I also, I love talking about this with parents as well, is that you need to know what you're reading. Well, if you don't know for yourself, how do you know if someone's going to be ripping you off or anything like that? So it's a survival skill.
That's it.
And even if it's it doesn't have to be university level reading that you can do, but if you can read a basic contract.
It could be a rental contract.
Exactly.
You know, it could be like, oh, if you leave before your period ends, then you have to pay $10,000. If you can't read that, well, you know, how do you know? Yeah. And we can't all afford solicitors all the time.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's about that. Exactly. Preservation, I guess, more than perseverance. We're going to preservation.
Our brain is meant to help us adapt and survive in the environment that we're in.
Yeah.
And this is the environment that we're in. And it includes reading.
Exactly.
It includes being able to do some things with numbers so that we know how much money we're getting. Otherwise, people are going to rip us off.
Yeah.
You know? We need to survive.
Yeah. Well, that's a very good point. Very good point. And I feel like we often take for granted that, you know, it was a process to learn to read and to spell and to, you know, and I'm sure everyone has those moments where they go, how do I spell that again?
Yeah.
You know, and
I still have them.
Yeah, I definitely have them. Even especially, it's really bad if you're trying to teach a child how to spell a word and you have a moment you're like, is that right? Because it looks really weird.
Well, I have something really funny. So, dyslexia, having trouble with left and right is pretty common.
Yeah.
Now, I've never been able to set a table without putting the knife and fork in my hands.
Oh, because
so I have that left and right issue. And when
Yeah.
I was a gymnast, when I was young, my left foot would come out when my right foot was supposed to come out, and that. But I never had a learning difficulty per se. But there's obviously something there.
Yeah.
So
there's like an imbalance with
yeah.
the left talking to the right.
Whatever it is, it's made life very interesting. And I was never going to be an Olympic gymnast.
That's okay.
But that's fine. We had a giggle along the way.
That's it. If you can't laugh, then you know, you just have to laugh at yourself.
Right. For sure.
Oh dear. Oh, how funny. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast,
Thank
Monique.
you so much for having me.
I really appreciate it. So we'll put in the show notes all the ways that you can contact Monique or have a chat, like she said, if you're curious or you might feel being pulled, but maybe there is something else going on for you or your child. Definitely have a chat with her. She's very approachable, I promise. And yeah, that's all for today.
Thank you for listening to Willow Healing Matters, the podcast. We have so much love and gratitude that you have taken the time out of your day to empower you on your healing journey. The views shared by the person being interviewed might not necessarily reflect that of the host and should be used at your own discernment. Trust what resonates for you and follow your heart and soul guidance. If you have any underlying medical conditions or mental health issues, please consult with your healthcare provider before pursuing any of the recommendations. Likewise, you can always contact the person being interviewed to find out more information. This can be found in the show notes. Remember to activate, align, heal, empower, and find love in everything that you do.